Every country on Earth is in debt. The United States owes $38 trillion, the European Union $14 trillion, and Japan $9 trillion. Even powerhouses like Germany, China, or oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia are burdened with massive debts. When you stop and think about it, a baffling paradox emerges. If everyone in the world owes money to one another, then who exactly is the creditor, the one who receives the money? Let's take a closer look at this complex financial world. Actually, everything is quite different from how it appears. Debt is not just a burden. It is like an invisible skeleton that keeps the modern world standing. Wars, economic crises, the massive booms and busts in the markets, they all rise upon this "I promise to pay" system. If you follow this debt chain to the end, you realize an unsettling truth. The world doesn't actually owe money to an outsider. It owes it to itself. However, that doesn't mean everyone gets an equal share of the pie. So, how did we end up with a debt of $315 trillion, 3 times the size of the global economy? It all started in 1694, when England couldn't find enough gold to cover its war expenses. The king went to wealthy merchants and said, "Lend me money, and I will pay you interest from future taxes." That is why the Bank of England was founded. This was actually a revolution. States could now spend money they didn't have in their coffers. In return, they gave investors a very secure government bond promise that could be bought and sold. So, debt became not a sign of failure, but a way to say, "I am a reliable ruler." Empires began issuing bonds and collecting interest instead of conquering land. Balance sheets replaced battlefields. Fast forward to today, and debt has become the world's largest trading commodity. Now, everyone is both a debtor and a creditor. Your pension fund, your savings in the bank, or the taxes you pay, they are all part of this system. If you are wondering, but who is holding the other end of this rope? Let's start with America. The vast majority of America's debt actually belongs to Americans. Banks, pension funds, and the Federal Reserve buy these bonds. So, debt is like a giant wheel turning on itself. The same is true globally. Japan lends to the US to Europe, Europe to developing nations. Everyone holds someone else's IOU. The biggest magicians here are the central banks. They don't just manage debt, they actually create it. New money is created with every bond transaction. There is almost no such thing as debt-free currency. The system relies on the belief that governments will continue to pay their interest. If one day everyone starts fearing that these debts will never be paid, that is when things get messy. Crises like those in Greece or Argentina erupt at exactly this point. Do you know the most interesting part? Governments actually don't plan to pay off their debts. This isn't a conspiracy, it's the way the system works. Debt exists not to be paid off, but to be constantly rolled over. A new bond is issued before the old debt is even finished. Because these bonds are the safest collateral in the global economy. If the US decided to pay off and close all its debt tomorrow, the safest asset in the bank's hands would vanish, and the markets would collapse. In other words, debt is essential for the heart of capitalism to keep beating. Politicians' promises to eliminate the debt are just selling an illusion. The goal is not to zero out the debt, but to keep it sustainable enough to turn the wheels of the system. As a result, debt works like a transfer mechanism between classes. There is a constant flow from labor and the tax-paying public to those who manage the money and hold the bonds. The line between debtor and creditor has become so blurred that it has turned into a complex knot. But remember, this system is entirely based on trust. As long as there is trust, the numbers can keep growing. But the moment that trust ends, everyone painfully remembers what that massive IOU bubble is actually made of. A promise too big to be kept. How does this perspective strike you? What else has come to mind regarding these invisible wheels of the system?